this video, I want to explore some of my thoughts and journey around making a death recording to a dying relative. So my father is dying of cancer, and he's the single biggest cause of my PTSD, which kind of is probably more of a, quote, complex PTSD, when terror and panic is raised up repeatedly and then not repaired in childhood. And as a result, so for my whole life, parts of me feel like they're about 2 years old and really panicky. Parts of me feel like 6, 7-year-olds, really panicky, waves of suicide, etc. So, despite a pretty idyllic life, his actions and inactions, about 2/3, and then my mom about 1/3, have led to this whole chain of ripple effects. First came migraine headaches, then came extreme hyperactivity, then came tormenting my siblings, then came, acting out in school, and then came depression, then came overwhelm, then came, a variety of coping mechanisms that were effective. But the dread, the panic, the fear, the anxiety, the shame, and the terror and the need to be in control has been with me my whole life to varying degrees. And it's been getting more pronounced, kind of shouting for some response in the last few years. And and meanwhile, my father has been deteriorating. So, he went from pretty optimal health, other than all the abuse that he was doing to us, and cheating and lying with my mom, to losing his job, living out of his car, becoming more and more obsessed with conspiracy theories, and tormenting people, and regressing. Like, he's been like a 6-year-old seeking attention, and a lot of his joy seems to be to kind of rile everyone up and then leave. And so there's this dynamic, and the closer anyone has been to him, the more they get complained about, and the further away they are from him, the less so. So I've kept my distance, and so I hear he speaks positively of me, who has nothing to do with him. He's always complaining about the people closest to him, who do pity him enough to have something to do with him. And so, what to say to a man who is dying, who has given me life, who decreased the abuse by about 70%. As far as I can tell from his own upbringing, both my parents decreased the abuse, and unhealth of their environment went down about 70%. So that's a pretty, and that's because of their spirit, who they are, and their ideals. So their idealism interacting with their abuse patterns, kind of reducing that. So there were positive and warm sides to my mom and dad, and I'm talking about my father. And yet the warm sides have not been frozen in time with PTSD. They have not been locked in the body because they're not traumatic. And so there's this situation where even though probably 70% of the time they were not actively abusive and doing a variety of things to improve my life, the times that they were overshadow that because they're frozen in the body and frozen in time. And both my parents are children emotionally to varying degrees. My mom is actually, it seems like she's grown up in the last 10 years or so, a lot more so than my father, who's much more regressed and just stuck at 2 to 6 years old emotionally. He's very smart intellectually. And so, so here's a man who, beat me, whipped, paddled, tormented, ignored, dissociated, a lot of torment, and then also made me feel stupid in many of our conversations, stupid and or superior. So sometimes it was us against the world, everyone else is stupid, and sometimes it's you're stupid. And hurt me on so many levels emotionally that I kind of actively shut down by about 14. So I think it's first of all important to understand that when you're in terror, when you're in hate, when you are in helplessness and grief and rage and all of this, one cannot love. So if you get frozen into some of those places, those frozen places cannot love. But there is a natural desire to love and an expectation to love and an inclination to love, I think, as human beings, to whatever extent we are safe, cared for, treated with honor. And as I say, my father improved that about 70%, sent us to Waldorf school, took us traveling, modeled entrepreneurship, brought us healthy food, clothing, had some space for my own ideas and things. Like I couldn't have left school and started my homeschooling program if he hadn't had some space for that. Got me private tutoring for my hyperactive acting out, which I don't think he acknowledged as being about him and my being raised. It also, another symptom was bedwetting, just terror. I don't think it, so, and then I watched him do that to my siblings. I was the oldest of 5, and not want to respond. And so this deep, unprocessed pain and grief. And yet there's also, I don't want any human being to go through the kind of hell that I've gone through and that he's gone through. I also don't think it's his fault. Meaning, I think that if you threw 100 sensitive men into his upbringing in this culture, maybe 90% of them would end up as sick and unhealthy parents. So that's not very good odds for him. Roll the dice, see, is he one of those 9 or is he the 1? And in one generation, he physically abused me less than he was abused. Probably psychologically abused me less. He was a little bit more close than I think his parents were to him. He had an alcoholic mother and a dissociative World War II veteran father who had PTSD and was violent. Completely alone in that world and trying to make sense of it. Very terrified individual. He looked around. He kind of became a hippie, got into metaphysical, philosophy and health food, was an entrepreneur, built passive solar homes, headed up several charities, was on the board of several charities, and is trying to raise this kind of Rudolf Steiner Waldorf family, while all of his emotional PTSD, etc., is playing out and passing on to his children, and he's conscious enough to feel shame about it and helplessness around it and rage about it, but not able to stop it and heal it. And and most of my childhood memories, I feel dread, shame, panic, fear of being punished, lonely, jealous, not very nice to my siblings, and feel bad about that. And I feel like I treated my siblings in a certain way and created in them the state that my parents created in me. It's very painful. And the only way I could feel like I could start to get healthy was to leave the family, just completely dissociate from the family physically, financially, in every way, which I did. And my life definitely got better to the extent that I got further away. So here's this man who has, given all he's got to love and upgrade his own experience. He didn't go to Waldorf school, he didn't get healthy food, he didn't get that kind of environment. So he provided all that. Those were structural things he could use his intelligence and initiative to provide. And then he probably didn't get diagnosed or know about PTSD and child abuse. And my mother was not very good for him in certain ways. Being able to really be present for a terrified little boy. She was a spaced out 4-year-old in many ways, and in other ways kind of a romantic spaced out teenager, interested in her own experience. And yeah, he took out his fear, his rage, hate, shame on us, and to some extent on my mother as well. And then, because this is all going against his own idealism, he felt even more shame, I think, and anger and hurt. And I think he just felt bitter and let down by the world that, he'd tried and done all this stuff, and yet he wasn't able to be the man he wanted to be, and he wasn't able to find the love and healing he wanted to find. And he felt like a failure in many ways, and yet he had done a reasonable job of responding with the opportunities available to him, the emotional and other technologies. So I think he became kind of sullen and defiant, like there's nothing more he knew how to do. It wasn't good enough. He could see that. Other people could see it. He wasn't getting helped. He was getting judgment. So I think he just started punishing everyone, which is what he did. And now he's getting ready to die. And one of the things that I've appreciated is that in the space away from him, I've had a sense of his spirit. Like who Michael would have been had he been born into a nurturing family without alcoholic and PTSD parents, and had the chance to be himself and be creative, very imaginative, had the space to be that man, and found a woman capable of loving and really honoring his little boy. Just the generosity, the grace, the creativity, the warmth that is naturally him, that in the disease of PTSD, trauma, terror, etc., is not and was not him in the way he was apparent to me. So of course there's a lot of grief in that. Grief for him, grief for us, grief for the world that so many people are going through this. And amongst my many fears are how intensely and rapidly he's now, in a place of blocking love and connection and turning everything around to blame. And in one of my adult efforts to connect with him, I don't trust the amorphous, because we all know, when you've gone through the cycle 1,000 times and you say, well, let's just see what happens, there's no mystery what will happen. It needs some very clear boundary and consciousness to interrupt the environment. And so when I went and visited with him last, I said, Dad, I'd like to love you. Is there anything we can do together, anything at all, that we can spend a few hours together in which you feel there's a reasonable chance that you will feel loved? We could go for a walk, we can hug, we can do that, anything at all. Is there any way at all that I can love you in a way that will feel like love to you? We couldn't answer the question. After 20 minutes of staring into space, changing the subject, going into, well, your mom says this, or, well, I don't really like that. I hate walks. Okay? Is there anything at all? There was no way in. No way in at all to experience love. The pain, the loneliness is just too much. He's a man with incredible grief and loneliness on his face. And when I get close to that, I become the enemy. And the combination of feeling his pain and loneliness and having the insanity of the way he'll twist that around and blame and attack in some way, it's just too much. When I'm in that environment, I can't see the best in him. And when I check in with my siblings, it seems like whoever's the closest to him is getting punished the most, riled up the most. And so I'm the furthest away, and apparently he's praising me. Like he talks to his friends, like Dane did this and did that, you know. So I feel like it's kind of a gift, like, okay, I'll be far away from you. Then you can praise me. You can feel good about that. You don't have to add to your kind of karma remorse that you're hurting me all the time. I'll give you that space. There's also, of course, the incredible grief and rage and anger that, you know, he's not apologized. He's you know, and that I'm in too much pain around that wound in order to get near someone who's going to play games and run around and have it end up feeling any good to me. I mean, when someone's going to play games and, you know, just run you around, it's much too big of a wound to subject to that indecency, that indignity. And he's not a big enough human being emotionally to really show up for that. So I don't bring the wound to him for that reason. Two, you know, his self-pity is one of his anesthetics and drugs, so of course he'll turn it all into no one appreciates me, I sent you to the Waldorf school and blah, 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 and blah, 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 and nobody appreciates, so, you know, and that's painful. Finally, when he's so young emotionally, and so clearly in pain and incapable of dealing with it, I pity and don't want it. It's like asking a 6-year-old who's in absolute terror and panic to be responsible for all this adult stuff. That 6-year-old should never have been made responsible, should have been helped out of being 6-year-old when he got frozen in trauma when he was 6 years old, should have been helped out throughout his whole life, never was. Shouldn't have been punished for being 6 years old. It should have been diagnosed and helped. And then a 6-year-old wouldn't have been asked to be dealt with this problem, but it wasn't. We don't have mechanisms in this country for that. So emotionally, I'm talking to a 6-year-old in many ways. So then how's that fair to dump all that on a 6-year-old? It's very... And then it's not fair to have it on my 6-year-old. And this is where I feel like a higher power of meditation is so important. There's no intelligent place to put all this pain, all this shame, all this rage when you're dealing with 2 6-year-olds. Parts of me, parts of him. You know, my mom, parts of her are 4 years old. You know, and it's often those young parts that feel like, oh, I'm not lovable, I did something wrong, I deserve to be punished, when you tell them, as opposed to, we make mistakes, but we can apologize and make some amends and grow. For him, it just got too painful and too deep. So in my goodbye recording to him, I made an audio recording. I sent it to my brother who was with him and told him he could play it to him if he'd like, if he thought it would be helpful to Dad in the place that he was in. He did, so he played it, and he was there with him. And he said Dad wanted to run away, block it out at times, but stayed with it and had some positive responses. But basically I shared what he had done that had the most painful impact on me. The fact that I've had pain and at times waves of suicide feelings my whole life, regardless of how great my outer reality is. The fact that it's enormously painful not to have a family because I can't get near him. There's just so much pain and trauma around the tormentor I became with my siblings. Basically all that torture and mind fucking and stuff that came onto me through mostly my dad, I turned around and gave it to my second two youngest siblings, and I felt horrible. I would wonder, like, why am I doing this? Felt miserable. I couldn't stop it. It was, I had this leadership role. It was almost expected of me. I just separated, and then I could stop it, and I could start becoming the person I wanted to be. At around age 12 was kind of the first time I started putting up walls in the family and just not engaging. Just, I can't open my mouth. I can't do anything without getting plugged into this role that I don't like being and making things worse. And there was a lot of pain leaving the family and going out on my own, knowing that I would improve and that they would be left stewing, and all my four younger siblings would be left stewing in their various sick, tormented dynamics. And I, of course, was blamed by my father for abandoning, and I didn't care about anyone, etc. And that was just expected, and I would have been tormented by something or other, no matter what happened. But at least I could not plug more energy into this. So I told my father about the pain, the grief, the anger, about what I'd learned about PTSD, my sorrow that he had not received the help he needed, my love for him as a being, my sense of who he is as a spirit, like the healthy Michael who is not stuck in paranoia, in tormented regression, in all of the wounds that he's been carrying his whole life. That man is a kind, sensitive, artistic, loving, gentle, romantic, very generous man. And I've seen that expression on his face at times when he's really able to be himself. I just have that sense in meditation, like this is who he is. And this is what trauma and PTSD has made him become. And it's not just his fault. This entire culture allowed it, sanctioned it with the right of parents to do what they want with their kids, didn't intervene, there was no help. He's been around people his whole life. No one has said, you have this and this needs to happen, and there's been no social support to make whatever that would be happen, if there's even the technology. So, and an enormous amount was lost to the world, to this culture, to the country, by losing him. Very brilliant man, currency hedge fund manager, as I say, running charities. Threw all that away because it was just too much going on inside. It was not inherent in his body. It was traumatized into him in his family life. So there's a lot of grief, and I'm very, very happy, and I told him this, I'm very, very happy that he's going to be dying soon because he will be free of this misery, and other people will be free of the torment that he is to them. Everyone will be free of a disease that is curable, but that this culture does not know how and is not willing to cure proactively and prevent to the necessary degree. That's not on him. You can't blame a child. That's on the culture and on our values going forward. This is my way of saying and honoring in this complex situation to all of the feelings. And I do feel a little better. My brother, who listened to the whole recording, felt he understood the family dynamic and he really appreciated it. He felt it was good for Dad and sparked some things. And I really hope that he's able to forgive and connect with who he truly is enough, that as he dies and is free of all these scars and wounds locked in the body, that he remembers who he is and is able to connect and leave and be free again of this torture. Because who he really is would never have hurt anyone. It's only the disease. And I really think that's one of the biggest learnings that we all need to have. People do not hurt one another. Disease does. Pain does. Pain is a disease. Terror is a disease. Shame is a disease. And the more we can heal pain, terror, shame, by kindness and a willingness to take care of one another from birth as human beings, the more we can be ourselves and bring that gift to the world.